I wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which was a true story about my two fathers. I'm a fourth-generation Japanese-American growing up in Hawaii. My real dad was a Ph.D. in education. I think he graduated from university in less than 2 years. Straight-A student, very smart man. He was the head of education when I was in high school. If it wasn't for my dad, who was a very good man, very smart academic man, I would probably still be in school today, because he told me that there was a difference between school smarts and street smarts. So at the age of 9, I met my rich dad. And my rich dad was my best friend's father. And my best friend's father ultimately became one of the richest men in the state of Hawaii. When you look at the white sand beaches and the palm trees and the big hotels, he owned not the buildings but the land under those buildings. And that's what made him so rich. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a true story based upon two fathers, very strong, honest men, talking to their sons, my best friend and I, about the subject of money. And that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad's about. So as my two dads had different ideas and philosophies about money, so do many people in real life have these different philosophies. For example, my poor dad would tell me, study hard, go to school, get good grades, and then find a good company to work for. Whereas my rich dad would say, don't be silly, study hard, get good grades, but learn how to buy good companies so you can own the company. One dad said, I'll never be rich because I have you kids. And the other dad said, I have to be rich because I have you kids. One dad always said, I can't afford it. And the other dad forbade us from ever saying, I can't afford it. My rich dad always asked us to say, how can I afford it? And the moment you do that, you actually task your brain to start thinking. One dad believed in the company or the government taking care of you and your needs. He was always concerned about pay raises, retirement plans, medical benefits, sick leave, vacation days, and other perks. The other dad believed in total financial self-reliance. He spoke out against the entitlement mentality and how it was creating weak and financially needy people. He was emphatic about being financially competent. My poor dad always said, when it comes to money, play it safe and don't take risks. And my rich dad said, learn to manage risk. So those were some of the differences in opinions between two fathers, especially the difference in ideas about the subject of money. And those little differences have made tremendous differences over their financial lifetimes. On October 11th, 1998, Merrill Lynch ran full-page ads in many national newspapers, and the headline of their advertisement read, "The world is 10 years old." And what they were referring to was that the Berlin Wall had come down in 1989. For those of you who are students of economic history, many of you know that the industrial age started around 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Eras like the agrarian age, the industrial age, seem to go in 500-year increments, or there's great changes in humanity every 500 years. So in 1492, there was a great upheaval, a great change, new ideas. Columbus proved that the earth was not flat. It was round, that he could, and he made a big mistake trying to go to China, but he bumped into a great country called America, and the world changed dramatically because of that. Well, here we are again, approximately 500 years after Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and what has happened is the industrial age is now ending, and the information age is now beginning. So many economic historians use the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 as the benchmark or as the event that heralds in the change. The interesting thing about this change is when the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War ended and globalization began. When the Berlin Wall came down, the World Wide Web went up. And at that moment, the rules changed. During the Cold War, what counted was the weight of your missiles. How big were your missiles? How much payload could they deliver? In the information age, it's not the weight of your missiles that counts anymore. It's the speed of your modem that counts. During the Cold War, there were two superpowers. In the information age, no one's in control. During the Cold War, the formula was E equals mc squared. In the information age, it's Moore's law that counts. And Moore's law is the law that states that the power of processing, of information processing, doubles every 18 to 24 months. During the Cold War, tradition counted. In the agrarian age, people really counted on traditions to things and things to hang on. In the information age, it's innovation that counts. But to me, the thing that is most exciting, given that although I didn't do well in school, I did very well in economic history. I love economics. Was that during the industrial age, the two preeminent or the key economists were men named Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes. The interesting thing is in the information age, the two people or the two economists that I think have the lead thoughts right now are a man named Schumpeter, who was a professor at Harvard, I think the Austrian Minister of Finance. And the other person is Andy Grove, the chairman of Intel. And what happened during the industrial age was that Marx and Keynes, what they tried to do was control the power of capitalism. So what Schumpeter and Grove believed is that this new unleashed capitalism will greatly brutalize and batter anybody who's still thinking with old industrial age ideas. So much of this program is really about having you examine your current ideas, your current beliefs, and hopefully, and maybe if they're not already changing, change your ideas or thoughts into what I consider information age ways of thinking about money, employment, business, and investing. The thing that Schumpeter and Grove talked about, or as Grove's book said, is only the paranoid survive. In other words, according to Moore's law, where the chips are doubling in power every year, you may be the king of the heap today, but tomorrow you may be out of business. So for those of you who are considering looking for job security and all this, if the leaders of your company are not changing as rapidly as technology is changing, your job security may be wiped out. For example, there are certain industries that are doing extremely well because of this information age, i.e. Amazon, AOL, and those companies. You have 20-year-olds who are billionaires all of a sudden. At the same time, you have other businesses who are being pounded by this information age. For instance, a friend of mine owns a series of car dealerships, and he had them in very remote parts of little country towns, and he thought he was safe because he was the only car dealer in that town. But suddenly, everybody in his town just clicks onto the web, and they can now shop for a price all over the U.S. In business, it's called your margin. So instead of getting $5,000 per car, he now has to get $500 per car because his competition is on the web as well as he is. So the web for him, an industrial age type of company, has really leveled the playing field. Another friend of mine is a travel agent. She's had a very successful business. Everything's going well. Suddenly, because people can start choosing airline tickets online, airlines have to compete. And what the airlines did to her was they took away her commission. So suddenly she's now competing not so much with the airlines, but with people who have internet websites who can buy tickets without needing her. And the same thing is happening in stock brokerages today. Many day traders are going online and trying to muscle out their brokers, saying, we don't need a stockbroker right now. I can bypass a stockbroker and not pay that person commission. So for some people, this information age is really, really opening massive amounts of opportunities. And it's those people who are thinking. For people who are clinging to old industrial age ideas like my poor dad had, which is get a safe, secure job, employment for life, let the government take care of you, I think this new transition could be frightening them. So for many of my friends, like this travel agent or the person who owns a car dealership, because something has changed when the Cold War ended and the New World opened up, they sort of go back to what I consider industrial age thinking. For instance, my travel agent says, maybe I should get another job with a bigger travel agency. Or my car dealership friend says, maybe I should put in a car detailing shop or something like this. And what they do is they go back to industrial age ideas. The idea of working harder is the way to get ahead. What this program is about is to give you new ideas, new ways of thinking, so that in many ways you can work less, make more money, and take advantage of this great explosion coming about right now called the information age. Although my book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has reached great popularity, it has also received some flack, should they say. And the reason it's come into some controversy is because I think it's going up against some core values, some core beliefs, some things that are very important to other people that are actually industrial age ideas. And so what I often say to people is my job is to find a sacred cow, shoot it, and barbecue it. And that is my job here with this program. My job is not to insult you, not to devalue your core beliefs. I think that some of the things I may say may shake you, may disturb you. But unless I shake and disturb you, maybe we don't learn that much. So the purpose of my doing this program is to maybe rattle some of the core beliefs you may have, some of the ideas, and hopefully you'll come up with new ideas that'll take you into new directions to take advantage of the changing world. So some of these sacred cows, should I say, of the industrial age are, find a safe, secure job. And my poor dad, that was everything to him. To him, job security was everything. The unfortunate thing was that he's being a very honest man, being in government. He was fired at age 50 because he could no longer put up with the corruption he saw in government. And so although I didn't really get along with my poor dad as the years went on because he was more socialistic and I was pretty capitalistic as a young man, I did gain a tremendous amount of respect for him for the ability to stand up, even though it was unpopular, even though he knew he was going to lose the election. He was a Republican in the state of Hawaii, and Forbes magazine called Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, the People's Republic of Hawaii. And my poor dad, the school teacher, the superintendent of education, the PhD, had the guts to stand up and run for lieutenant governor knowing he was going to get wiped out. And when he got wiped out, his boss, the governor, called him in and says, "You'll never get a job in state government again." And there went the idea of the safe, secure job. So at the age of 50, my poor dad, a very honorable man, very big-hearted man, was now obsolete. So instead of the idea of a safe, secure job and a secure retirement, he wound up getting poorer and poorer the older he got. And it really broke my heart, very simply because he did not seem to be able to grasp the changes that had come onto his life, changes that are facing and will face many people as we move more and more into this information age. As Andy Grove of Intel says, only the paranoid will survive. And that means those who are continually looking over their shoulder, continuing to make changes very quickly will survive. So the idea of a safe, secure job is really obsolete, especially when you look at this thing called the 401k. What the agreement was in the industrial age is that, you got out of school, you joined the company, you worked hard, you got your pay raises, and if you kept your nose clean and you worked your way up the corporate ladder, and voila, at age 65, you retired, you had a company pension, you had a government pension, and hopefully you had some savings. And life was happy, and you could cruise around the country club in your little golf cart. Well, that was a great idea for anybody born before 1935. For those born after 1935, the rules have changed. And one of the biggest changes with the agreement or the rules of employment was they shifted from a company pension plan to this thing called a 401k. The difference is a company pension plan is called a defined benefit pension plan. And a defined benefit pension plan is an industrial age pension plan, which means the company will give you a benefit, defines its benefit for as long as you live. So if you retire at age 65 and hopefully live to 165, the company will pay you a defined benefit for 100 years or for as long as you live. Now, if you live to 66, the company wins. If you live to 165, you win. But at least you were secure in that era. One of the things that shocked me back in the 70s, I noticed these things called 401ks coming in or superannuations, and these are defined contribution pension plans. And I call these information age pension plans. And although they're very good, in other words, a company will give you a 50% contribution and all that other stuff, it is still defined by contribution. In other words, you retire at age 65 and you have, let's say, hopefully $1 million in it when you retire. And let's say the stock market crashes. See, the problem with the 401k is indexed to the market. So if the market is very high, you're a rich person. But if the market crashes, you're poor. And the problem is if it crashes when you're 85 and you have no money in it at that point, the company is now off the hook. And that's what I mean, one of the changes between an industrial age employment agreement and an information age employment agreement. So when people say, well, is a 401k bad? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's different. And I'm saying it may not be enough for many people. The other thing that I'm concerned about these new information age pension plans is that it's defined by the contribution. I have companies where several employees are not contributing anything at all, very simply because they don't have anything to contribute. So the company does not match their funds. My prediction is sometime past 2010, 2020, 2030, this change will become reality, or the significance of this change will hit home for many people when they find out they don't have enough money to retire on. And then people say, well, it's no big deal, I'll keep working. Or what other people say is that when I get older, my expenses go down. Yes, some expenses go down, but other expenses go up. For example, if you look at the price of what it costs to be in a nursing home when you're real old and feeble, the cost of being in a nursing home today as I talk is around $4,000, $5,000 for an average nursing home. That's more than the person made per month working. So while the 401k is a good idea and many people are doing well by it, my only problem with it is it's really a savings plan, not really an investment plan. Every 75 years, America has had a depression, or the industrial age has had a depression. The last time a depression started was 1930 approximately, so we're close right now. Not that it'll happen, and people are saying things are different, but that's not really true. Things may be different, but some things remain the same. And what remains the same for many people is this thing called a mania, greed, or stupidity. And I think it was Sir Isaac Newton who was caught in the last bubble, back in 1700 or something. It was called the South Sea Bubble. And what happened is the mania of land in America, which is called the South Seas at that time, is the same as the mania going on with internet stocks today. So everybody's just pouring money in. A recent study just came out: for every dollar of wealth produced in America today, 2.6 is also created in debt. So what many people are doing is they're actually borrowing money to put into the stock market, blah, blah, blah. And we all know what goes up must come down. So your 401k may be fat today and empty tomorrow. That's what I'm saying. There's another thing about mutual funds that many people do not know versus real estate. In a mutual fund, you may buy a stock at $50 and let's say it goes to $100 because of the boom. But suddenly if the market crashes, the mutual fund will at that point need to start liquidating to be able to pay redemption. And it needs, people are saying sell, 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 sell. So if a panic sets in, a mutual fund must sell. And what they sell are their best stocks because they're the most liquid. They have the most readily acceptable market. So they sell a stock at 100. The problem is they bought it at 50. There's a $50 capital gains inside that mutual fund. But guess who pays the capital gains? You do. In other words, the fund passes on the gains. And you may have joined the fund, in one day and it crashes the next day. You will pay the gains. So not only is your mutual fund losing value, you'll get a tax bill from the government for all the money you supposedly made. Mutual funds have its place. But in my opinion, as a professional investor, I wouldn't bet my retirement on it. The difference within real estate, which is quite interesting, is one thing nice about real estate is they'll let you borrow 90% of it. If you notice, a bank will let you borrow 90% of the price of real estate. But if let's say I went to XYZ Bank and I said, okay, here's a $100,000 piece of real estate. Will you give me $90,000 for it? They say, oh yeah, sure, of course. 30 years, 7%, of course, of course, of course. But you go to that same bank and you say to them, I want to buy $100,000 worth of your shares. Will you give me 90% of the finance, or borrow 90% of the money, and will you give me a 30-year loan on it? Of course they'll say no. Because there is a difference between paper assets, real estate, and businesses. So the average investor, since they've gone to school and never been taught much about business or investing, really doesn't know the differences. The other thing that's wonderful about real estate is I can make a profit and be given a tax deduction on my profit. Whereas in a mutual fund, you can lose money, but you'll be taxed on money you never made. So there are such intricacies or reversals that the purpose of this program is not to give you all the answers, but maybe inspire you to study further, just so that if you have more information, because it is the information age, you'll be better able to survive and thrive in this great booming world we're now entering. Another sacred cow I'm going to go after is this popular idea that the way to get rich is by being cheap. cut up your credit cards, live below your means. Personally, I think that's ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying that being frugal is not the thing to do. Frugality has its place. But my rich dad used to say that the problem with getting rich by being cheap is that you're still cheap. And people who are rich and cheap give the rich a bad name, i.e., Scrooge gave the rich a bad name and Silas Marner gave the rich a bad name because they were rich by being cheap. And unfortunately, from my perspective, there's many people going around touting the idea the way to get rich is to be cheap, to play it safe, and live below your means. That's definitely not what this program is about. Frugality has its place, but it's not everything. To spend your life living cheap and dying rich, to me, is insanity. Yet, another sacred cow, not really a sacred cow, I think it's the foolish cow, is this idea of affluenza. Too many people who are on fixed incomes and are not living cheap, what they're doing is they're living in the realm of keeping up with the Joneses. I call it affluenza. They're buying big houses on credit because they think they get a tax break for buying a big house. Now, if the government's giving you a tax break, watch out. Because all they're saying to you is, if you give me $1 in taxes, I'll give you 30 cents back. If that makes sense to you, give me $1 and I'll give you 50 cents back. But that makes no sense to somebody who's an investor or who is a business owner. The other part about affluenza is many people are living on credit. And that's what really kind of frightens me. They get further and further in debt, and instead of using checks, they're using credit cards. They're looking for different interest rates or different bonuses and all this. Or they watch TV and they have some sports star come on and say, "Hi, I'm a famous sports star." The smart thing to do is take your credit card debt and roll it into your home equity loan, and the government will give you a tax break for it. And that's the level of sophistication most people are at. They're caught in what I call the rat race of life. They have a high-paying job, and they keep trying to work for a high-paying job. The problem is the more money you make and the harder you work, the harder you're taxed. And because you're taxed harder, the government then says, or your accountant then says, buy a bigger house because you get a tax break. For most people, especially in the middle class, that may be financially intelligent. For my rich dad, he didn't think that was too intelligent. Another sacred cow that my poor dad, the school teacher, very good, honest man, he always said, be a hard-working man. The unfortunate thing with that thinking is that if you look at the facts, the people that worked the hardest are often paid the least. And not only are they paid the least, they're often paying the highest percentage in taxes. Most of us know the poor pay a higher percentage of taxes than the rich. And most people do not know why, because our schools never taught people why. Ever since 1215, which was the signing of the Magna Carta, when the rich barons of England went to King John at Runnymede and said, "King, you no longer have the power. We're taking over at this point." Ever since 1215, the rich have made the rules. Unfortunately, when you go to school, you're never taught about the differences in the rules. Most people do not realize in America, an employee, somebody who works for somebody else, is taxed by a different tax code. If somebody is self-employed or a small business owner or somebody like a doctor, accountant, attorney, engineer, they're taxed by a different set of taxes. The rich have an altogether different set of taxes. So one of the things my rich dad taught me was if you want to get rich, you really have to understand whose rules you play by. And so some of this program will go into some of the differences in the tax laws and some of the reasons why the rich get richer. And that's why my rich dad often said, if you want to be a good, hard-working man, you'll probably never get rich. And that really disturbs me personally, because given this huge mania of everybody speculating on the stock market and people just want to get rich quick and all this, it is the people who are actually doing the work who are being left the furthest behind. And again, that's an industrial age idea. And part of this program is to maybe inspire, maybe educate, but most importantly, have you start thinking differently so that you're not falling behind and you can start moving ahead into this brave new world we enter. So one of the reasons my poor dad had a really hard time getting ahead was because he was a hardworking man. That's an industrial age idea. And he was taxed to the max. The harder he worked, the more in taxes he paid. And my rich dad, on the other hand, because he understood the tax laws, the less he worked, the more money he made, the less he paid in taxes. And for most people, taxes are your highest expense, except for the rich. Another sacred cow that my rich dad had me examine or shoot and barbecue was the idea of get a good education from a prestigious university. Now, I'm not saying a good education from a prestigious university is not a good idea. I think it's an excellent idea. The problem with it in the industrial age, where all you had to do was get a job, if you went to Harvard or Yale, it was the ticket in. But if you notice today in the information age, Bill Gates dropped out of school, Michael Dell dropped out of school, Henry Ford was considered an idiot, and Thomas Edison, the founder of the biggest company in the world, General Electric, was considered a moron. The point I'm making here is that today, to be successful, you need school smarts as well as street smarts. Unfortunately, some of the things you learn in school are considered bad habits that prevent you from being successful on the street. Such an example is in school, you learn not to make mistakes. In the real world, the people that make the most mistakes makes the most money. And the biggest granddaddy sacred cow of them all, my poor dad always said, our house is an asset, and it's our largest investment. And my rich dad always said, number one, if you're financially literate, you'll know that your house is not an asset for most people. And if it's your largest investment, you're in big financial trouble. Now, in the industrial age, it was okay that your house be your largest investment, simply because you could count on your company pension and Social Security or a government pension to take care of you, so you didn't really need a pension. But in the information age, you don't want your house to be this biggest investment. You want your portfolio or your 401k to be a lot larger than your house. And that's one of the big changes that's happening today. Many people are counting on their real estate as the only thing they can fall back on. And the problem with falling back on it is they've already second and triple mortgaged the thing because they're so deeply in debt. The reason my rich dad said it's not an asset goes back to what Rich Dad, Poor Dad was about, was the importance of financial literacy. If you can read a financial statement, you will see that your house, for most people, is not an asset. It's really a liability. The word mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. So the real word for mortgage means engagement until death. And that's what's happening to more and more of the middle class, is that they're working hard, paying excessive amounts of taxes. They're told to buy a big house, so they get into debt. And then because they have a hard time making ends meet, sometimes they buy more and more on credit cards, getting further in debt, buying bigger cars, all thinking that they're assets. Meanwhile, because the stock market is running up so high, many people are borrowing even more money to put into the stock market. That is what my rich dad would say, a lack of sanity maybe, and really a lack of some degree of financial intelligence and literacy. Another thing I had to learn to overcome was this idea of how much money do you make. My poor dad was always fixated on going to school, get good grades so you can get a high-paying job. And I noticed many people in the middle class focus on how much they make. That's a very bad habit. People say, well, how much do you make? That doesn't count in the real world. That's a bad habit. What I had to learn from my rich dad is not how much money I make, but how much I keep. So the difference here is this: you're still focusing on money, but you're focusing on a different kind of money. One is gross income and one is net, what you keep to the bottom line. In other words, my poor dad, let's say, he'd be fixated saying, oh, good, you got a job that's paying $1,000 a month. My rich dad doesn't care how much money I'm making. He wants to know what percentage of what I'm making I'm keeping. In other words, if I can keep $300 in savings after paying everything else off, then he says you have a 30% income to expense ratio. What you will find here is that a habit is really very simply a shift in focus. What you think is important. What you'll find out, what the middle class think is important, is exactly opposite of the rich think is important. So it's not that hard work. It's not like trying to break old habits. It's a matter of trying to change your focus, change some realities you may have. Another example on bad habits is that my poor dad, I know it's the middle class, they always focus on saving. Work hard and save money. They think that's smart. I'll be going into the difference between smart and risky. So the middle class thinks that saving money is smart, and they think investing is risky. What you'll find out is that my rich dad thought saving was risky and investing was smart. So they're exactly 180 degrees opposite. And it's not anything different. See, as my poor dad and my poor mom, they spend forever working hard to save money. So they would shop sales, get the newspaper, they say, which supermarket's having this sale. They drive all the way across town to save 5 cents a pound or save 3 cents on some pound of sugar, or they spend all this time clipping coupons so they can save 5 cents on a new tube of toothpaste. They really worked hard to save money and put money in the bank. Very bad habit, because it's a waste of the most precious resource you have, which is time. Now, my rich dad would do the same thing. He'd read the newspapers, he'd drive all the way across town, but he wasn't looking to save 5 cents on a tube of toothpaste or buy a used car. He was looking for something he could invest in, like a business or a piece of real estate. You see, the habit is basically the same. You're working hard to find a bargain, but the poor people, and they're trying to save money, they're trying to save money on things that lose value anyway. In other words, if you buy, a pound of sugar and you save 5 cents, at the end of the whole process, it's gone anyway. You haven't saved anything. You've wasted a lot of time. But most importantly, you've sucked a lot of time out of your day looking for a bargain that ultimately loses money. My rich dad would do the same thing, same habit, but he would, let's say he buys a rental property, a small 2-bedroom house or something. It's the same time, same effort, same mental set, but he buys something that produces income from him and goes up in value, hopefully. So what you'll see, that's a habit, but it has nothing to do with what you do. It's so much more how you think. And that's a lot of what we'll be getting into in this Choose to Be Rich, is you have to choose what you think is important, because the actions or the habits are almost the same. The difference is the results are almost 180 degrees out. My poor mom and dad tried really hard to save money, and they wound up broke. My rich dad worked hard trying to save money buying assets, and he got richer and richer. And it's that subtle difference. It starts with the idea of what you think is smart and what you think is risky. I'll say it again. My poor dad thought saving was smart and investing was risky. My rich dad thought saving was risky and investing was smart. When you look at a bank account, in the banker or in the tax system, you're taxed for your savings, and you're given a tax incentive to be in debt to invest. That should tell you something. But the middle class and the poor, they still think saving is smart. And that's why most of them don't become rich. They just have very bad habits. And another habit is that a lot of times when the poor and middle class want something, they don't hesitate. They go out and they borrow money so they can work harder to buy, let's say, a new car. They have the car of their dreams or the house of the dreams. They say, oh dear, all we have to do is we'll just work harder, or we'll buy, you take on 2 jobs and we can buy the house of our dreams with a new car. That's a very bad habit. The same thing I talked about saving and investing, what my rich dad taught me to do is if I want a new car, I go shopping not for a car, but I go shopping for an asset. And I've told this story several times that when I wanted a new Porsche, I had the money to buy the Porsche, but instead of putting the money into the Porsche, which would have meant the thing would have lost all its value within 5 or 6 years, I took that same money and bought myself a mini storage or mini warehouses. That mini warehouse then throws off the cash via which to make the monthly payments on my Porsche. And what happens is eventually the Porsche is paid off. I still have the Porsche, but the best part about it is my money is safe in the asset, and that asset is still giving me cash flow into my pocket every month, making me richer and richer. So I have my money, I have an asset, and I have a Porsche. And that's what makes the rich richer, and that's a very good habit. So one of the things about habits, what causes people to have bad habits is, especially today, we want it when? Now. You deserve it. What you should do is, come up, just buy it, and low downs and easy monthly payments because you deserve it now. So you run out, buy some new furniture or the new swimming pool or a new car. And that's called lack of emotional intelligence, or the emotion of delayed gratification. What you will find that the most successful people in the world, they're not necessarily academically smarter, but they are emotionally more intelligent. And one of the things we'll be discussing is emotional intelligence and how important that is to your wealth. So the thing about delayed gratification, the ability to say, no, I'm not going to buy this now, I'm going to buy an asset first, is very high emotional intelligence. To run out and buy the new car and say, I'll just put it on time payments, I'll just work harder, is very low emotional intelligence. And that, too, is an example of good habits and bad habits, but they're habits driven by emotions. The next thing I had to overcome is a subject or a word that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and that's called arrogance. Now, when I was broke, I was a very humble individual. But in my 20s, I built this company, and it was called the Nylon Invaluable Wallet. I started that business, and we went from being 20-year-old guys with no money to suddenly becoming millionaires on paper, at least. And we became very rich. And guess what? The more money we made, the more we thought our intelligence went up. But our intelligence didn't go up. What went up was our arrogance. And we got cocky, and we thought nobody could tell us anything. The next thing that started to happen was, instead of paying attention to the business, we were like drunken sailors on leave. We got all this money, and the next thing you know, there was Porsches and Mercedes, and we were ripping through town. I was in the newspaper. They called my friends and I the Wonder Boys, and we were the new entrepreneurs on the block, and it went straight to our heads. So the thing I say to people is that if you're an idiot without any money, when you make a lot of money, you become a bigger idiot. I know, because I did it. The other thing that happened was, when people say, what happened? I said, well, when your arrogance goes up, there's fast cars and even faster women. And you know what? It was a lot of fun. And I don't regret a thing, but the thing came crashing down because of that arrogance. And that's why a lot of times you'll find people who suddenly come into large sums of money, like an inheritance, or a young, guy fresh out of college, getting a $5 million contract to play baseball, or somebody winning the lottery. What gets to them is that they think when their money increases, their intelligence goes up. In actuality, when their money increases, their intelligence goes down, and that's called arrogance.